How wonderful to see a room full of poets and poetry lovers in person. I have the wrong page of my notes here. Welcome to the first of the Mid-Valley Poetry Society's 2023 Poetry and Performance events. I think most of you know I'm Eleanor Berry, co-founder and chair of the Mid-Valley Poets. I realized, having kind of lost track of time in the past few years, that we're at the 10th anniversary of this series, which started with a performance by Anatoly Malatkov and a wonderful viola player from Silverton, whose name I have unfortunately forgotten, but somebody here probably remembers. It was a wonderfully memorable performance. The whole purpose of this series is to give poets for whom performance is an important part of their art a chance to come together with audiences in our Mid-Valley area. As is often the case, this year's series is made possible by a grant from the Marion Cultural Development Corporation to the Oregon Poetry Association, of which our informal group is formally a unit. And it's also made possible by a wonderful group of Mid-Valley Poetry Society volunteers, including ones who are here, Franca Hernandez, who's in the back corner, and furnished tablecloths and the wherewithal to eat goodies. And Susan Morse, who does many things for us besides baking wonderful goodies. Our poetry box, young people's poetry workshops, in which she's put a great deal of energy, and Mike Schuler, who will be emceeing our open mic portion. Invisible, John Van Driel, except in the form of the video recording equipment that my long-suffering husband, Richard Berry, is operating somewhat under duress. Now, I've asked people to remind me of this, and I reminded myself of this by putting it in my notes. Like any all-volunteer organization, we depend not only on grants, but on donations. At the corner of our refreshment table, there's a little planter box which is hungry for donations. And if anybody's able to donate $10 or more, you are welcome to take a copy of our anthology, Poems Out of the Box, edited by Mike Schuler, cover design by Jess Coleman, and in it you will find poems that we exchanged by a virtual poetry box curated by Mike Schuler during the pandemic, when we did not have physical poetry boxes. What else? Okay. Now, what's happening today? Today, our two featured poets, Willa Schneeberg and Carter McKenzie, will be presenting their work in dialogue. I'll say a little bit more about that. After their presentation, we'll have an intermission. They have books to sell and will happily sign them. We have some refreshments, an opportunity to talk with one another, and to sign up for the open mic if you would like to enter into the dialogue with poems of your own, or to sign up for our email list if you'd like to get communications about our events. Now, a little by way of, I'm introducing them together because they will be performing together. Willa Schneeberg and Carter McKenzie come to us from opposite ends of the Willamette Valley, Willa from Portland and Carter from Eugene. They both come, as do I, originally from the East Coast, again from North and South, respectively. For me, the germ of today's program was in Willa Schneeberg's new book, which I think is her sixth. But, I think I'm going to say a little more about this. I met her with what I realize is her second book a good many years ago. It was this book, The Naked Room, and its cover photograph of the canisters of unclaimed cremains of patients at the Oregon State Hospital that inspired this program initially, as I opened it and found that its body of poems evokes the inner lives not only of those institutionalized and in therapy, but those exiled in any way from the mainstream of society. To hear and give a hearing to those suffering on the margins is the shared passion of these two poets. And it was the two of them who made me realize this shared stem, to borrow a metaphor from Carter McKenzie's most recent book of poetry, this shared stem of their work, which is in two very different styles. In Willa's work, I hear urgent speaking voices, many voices, because she does many poems in persona. In Carter's work, I hear a deep dreaming. Very different rhythms, very different movements. So I'm particularly excited to hear these two poets perform their work as a conversation in poems.
All right, we will begin.
So, yes.
So, of poetry, Adrienne Rich wrote in her essay, Permeable Membrane, the matter of art enters the bloodstream of social energy. Call and response. The empathic imagination can transform, but we can't identify the precise loci of transformation. Can't track or quantify the moments, nor can we say how or where they lead through innumerable, unpredictable passageways toward recreating survival, undermining illegitimate power and its cruelties. She also writes in the same essay that poetic imagination is radical, meaning root tangled in the grit of human arrangements and relationships, how we are with each other. For both Willa and me, poetry is a necessary way of bearing witness. It is, as the American feminist poet Muriel Rukeyser wrote, a meeting place where we can feel our consciousness in the world and meet the world. The poem is both vessel and portal for being present with ourselves and the world, for being attentive, which is a form of love, and which is transformative if I am following the poem the way I must as I write it. Because in following the poem, what matters are not my opinions, but what the poem needs to see. And in writing that work, I am also transformed in feeling and perspective and engagement through language. That is how I understand the making of the poem as a process of radical empathy that shows us how we are with each other, beginning with how I am with others, the human and the more than human.
So just want to remind everyone that the title of this program is Poetry and Madness, a Reclamation Through Radical Empathy. And we're hoping that we will be able to present that to you, that will feel, that it will resonate and will feel relevant. I'm delighted to be with you for National Poetry Month and to be in performance together. I want to thank the Mid-Valley Poetry Society, and particularly Eleanor Berry, for inviting Carter and myself for making this afternoon happen. I also want to congratulate Eleanor for receiving the 2023 Soapstone Bread and Roses Award, which acknowledges, yeah, because she's too modest to mention it, which acknowledges women writers who have influenced the region through their work and uplifted others through their community efforts. So I'm going to talk about, Carter already articulated what radical empathy is. I'm going to talk about the aspect of the persona poem in terms of empathy. And Carter and I both utilize the persona poem. Maybe I do a little more than you, but you certainly do quite a bit. And Carter will be reading some persona poems. I believe all of you here desire to enhance your empathy towards those around you. Reading and writing the persona poem, which is writing in a voice other than one's own, getting inside the life of another human being, real or imagined, issues of empathy and compassion come to the fore. For the poets in this room, which I think there are many, you may consider writing in this form as a way to heighten your empathy towards others. So how many in the audience actually write the persona poem? Yeah, so there's quite a few who already, that is part of what you do. Poets who write in this form who have particularly spoken to me are Muriel Rukeyser, Langston Hughes, and Patricia Smith, because they are poets who witness and speak out, not in a polemical rant, not in newspeak, but through passionate use of craft against what is unjust. Carter and I will be reading a number of persona poems this afternoon. So I'm going to start, and as I said, we're reading in dialogue. So I'm going to start with a poem entitled Unsanctioned. Just to tell you a little bit about this poem, it was inspired, a lot of my poems, and we're hoping at the end, after the open mic, we'll answer some questions if any of you have any questions, but a lot of my poetry is researched. Some of it is close to the life of the poet, but some of it isn't, and Carter as well. We both use research in our poetry. So this one is relates to the fact that inmates at the New York State Lunatic Asylum, can you imagine, that's what they used to be called, the New York State Lunatic Asylum in 1851, wrote for the Opal, a monthly periodical. From 1851 to 1860, Dr. John P. Gray was a superintendent, unsanctioned. Like any grand manor, gardens, this institution has a topiary. Kangaroos, elephants, and turtles. But we are the real animals. Jezebels, segregated from male patients. Dr. Gray calls himself our protector. In this bucolic setting, safe from noxious vapors, we are instructed to dance virtuously, recite poems that will not excite, and become ladies again, as if we ever were. Tourist picnic on the manicured grounds to stare, feel self-righteous, leave contented and certain that we aren't contagious. We hide scraps of purloined butcher paper and writing implements in our corsets, limb depravity and godlessness on rags inside our thighs and behind mirrors. We are the women relieved, our children are born dead. In the wards at night, if we pace or scream, we are tied to our beds, and matrons shut our mouths with their palms until we blubber. If Dr. Gray's minions could, they would tat scalloped edges around our death wishes, turn them into doilies. But sometimes our unsanctioned words have wings. With pieces of chalk and pencil nubs, we scratch green and yellow hot air balloons that lift us over the pallets.
The survey of Scottish witchcraft, based from the University of Edinburgh in the School of History, Classics, and Archaeology, was published in 2003. It identifies 3,837 people who were accused of witchcraft in Scotland during the years of the Witchcraft Act of 1563 through 1736. 3,212 of these are named, and there are a further 625 groups and individuals not named included in the database. 85% of those known who were accused were women. And the highest percentage of women accused, of those who were accused, were aged 50 through 60 years of age. Quote, "For most cases, we know that the accused witch existed, but not much more. This poem comes from my imagination of one of the unnamed women accused. A midwife refutes accusations of witchcraft. Scotland, the Hebrides, 17th century. The king and the priests know nothing of me. They are simply obsessed with their own bad dreams, so I hear. What do I know but the birthing, the weaving, the garden I keep, the lichen and the flowers of this place, root and stem, the making of colors for wool from ragwort, nettle, and the bog water lily, its rich blackness. What do I know? Sometimes my help is needed to cure a fever or to find a lost goat or cow or sheep. How I listen, how I observe all the creatures that speak to me, offering my prayers to the Good One. I rise before dawn, an ordinary woman. I do not steal one thing, light or dark, neither the cream from a neighbor's cow, nor the power of storms. I do not betray. I keep my silence. I do not trick. I swear I have never floated in an eggshell or in a sieve among the waves. The waves frighten me. I cannot swim. I do not tie knots except to bind the wound, to heal the sick. I do not sow destruction. I sow gardens, I say again. I helped some of you be born. I know my mother's teaching. Every peat has its own smoke. Every person has their own torment. Like everyone else, I know ghosts. I do not deny myself solitude. I love the stars. I love this place where I was born. I swear I heard the wind, but I did not see it.
The next poem is entitled Intake at the Canton Asylum for Insane Indians, South Dakota, 1905. And I just want to tell you a little bit about this one. It was actually, as I said, called the Canton Asylum for Insane Indians, AKA Hiawatha Insane Asylum, so it only is derogatory, then even more derogatory. In South Dakota, it existed from 1898 to 1934. Can you believe it? It was the only mental institution in the U.S. exclusively created for one minority group. Okay, and this poem is in the voice, probably in those days it would have been a psychiatrist who did the intake. Intake at the Camden Asylum for Insane Indians, South Dakota, 1905. Cross your legs. Oh, and then I should tell you that if you saw it on the page, there's what he's saying to the Indian patient, and then what he's thinking is in italics. Cross your legs. Legs remain tight against each other. Squeeze my hand. Hand stays limp in the lap. What is that, bucket? Or that carrot? The brow furrows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Count backwards. Pick a favorite number. Something hoarse whispers out. Perhaps charges native tongue. Do you feel all right? Excited or depressed? Eyes close, head flops down. Of course the patient speaks English, but refuses to do so. Done. Return to your ward. It doesn't really matter what it is, Creek, Apache, or Sioux. She's just another imbecile. If you kill the Indian, you save the man.
This is the first part of a long poem written in response to my thinking about the first people who inhabited the valley which I call my home. Singing back. The numerically lessened Kalapuyans were, by 1840, a trivial annoyance to settlers who took their lands and employed them as laborers, but did not preserve for them any of their traditional homelands for their villages or for their resources needs. By 1851, there was no land in the Willamette Valley unclaimed by American settlers, who also called for the removal or genocide of all Indian peoples. David G. Lewis from Quartuk's Journal of Critical Indigenous Anthropology. From beneath the ground, roots and quartz, fragments, glinting, water carrying all it knows from the mountains. The world has ended before what first people ever hear, among them Kalapuyans, know. Over 14,000 years, over 1 million acres, they're making a fecund valley. I had not known of the Trail of Tears here. I had not known of the people forced to cede their lands, 263 miles over rough terrain, a journey of 33 days, untold deaths. In the cold, early year of 1857, quote, dimensions of suffering and tragedy, unquote, I had not known. And this neighboring valley and foothills where I live, original place of the Molalla Mountain Band, I had not known. The valley's settler named, lost. After settler catastrophe, the wagon train subject to myth of a shortcut over the mountains. To think of what it is not to know you are lost. The ignorance of that. Negative spaces. My own history of whiteness, how I know I can't see what I will keep trying to see.
So powerful. So the next poem is a little more personal. It does have a happy ending of sorts. This is a prose poem, and sometimes I find that the room of the more traditional lyric doesn't work and the poem sort of makes itself larger, and that was the case. If any of you wind up going to Berkeley, this poem is about my husband's grandfather, and you'll understand through the poem. But the happy ending is now is in Berkeley, a new street. My husband's name is Robin Bagai, and he's East Indian on his dad's side of the family. And in Berkeley now there is a new street that's called Kala Bagai Way, that's named after his grandmother. And there's actually posters. It's really kind of amazing to see his grandmother, his grandfather, anyway. So you'll see why they were honored in this way. Again, his grandfather's name was Vashu Das Bagai, and he died 3/17/1928, and it's called American History. Dr. Thind made history fighting to be Aryan, who's also my husband's godfather. Thind and his wife watched Robin at 4, while his mother was in labor. Soon his sister's head would crest between her legs. United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind went all the way to the Supreme Court. The justices agreed that although Thind was technically a member of the Caucasian race, he was not Caucasian in the popular sense of the word, so thus deemed not white. His citizenship was immediately revoked, and it became un-American for all South Asians, including Robin's grandfather Vashnu Das Bagai, to be naturalized or categorized as a free white person. Vashnu's right to carry an American passport, to own Bagai's bazaar on Fillmore, which he had scrimped to establish, was dissolved like words on a wet piece of paper, and his reason to wear a 3-piece suit obliterated. He booked a room in San Jose and wrote to his wife, Kala, "Well, dear, I have to leave you," and turned on the gas. I was raised with the phrase, "No Negroes, Jews, or dogs allowed," warning me that I shouldn't get too comfortable. Robin and I are comfortable together. Our hands often find the other, and when we sleep at night, we spoon. It's beautiful.
Teaching society a lesson is the same for every dictator. Prey on the presumed weak to secure rulership, a governance of stolen lives. In 1600, 59-year-old Anna Pappenheimer tortured and burned as a witch along with her husband and sons. How the church bells rang, how pleased Duke Maximilian I of Bavaria. In 1943, 21-year-old Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans, age 24, of Ludwig Maximilian University, Die Geschwister Scholl, the siblings, founders of the White Rose, decapitated at the guillotine for treason against the Third Reich, for the leaflets they had dispersed. Her dream of a baby surviving an abyss into which she herself would fall, one of her last dreams. Throughout our histories, dictators making an example of the so-called deviants, the poor, the courageous, the voiceless, the articulate, expendable, called, fearsome, monstrous. The dictators kept busy, snapping their pencils, tapping their feathers and pens.
There are 2 poems in this collection relating to Anne Sexton's life. And this is the one about her psychiatrist. And this book is divided into sections that relate, for those of you who might be in the mental health field, or those who've ever been in therapy, that kind of relate to different terms used in mental health. And this is part of a section called the 50-minute hour. And you probably may know that in New York it's 45. And I still tend to go close to 60, so, you know. I'm an old breed. It's called Pearls. And Dr. Martin T. Orne was Anne Sexton's psychiatrist. I wish I could have been with you and Dr. Orne in his office, you both sucking in cigarette smoke, letting it curl out through your nostrils when you said, I want to be the child, not the mother. It should be innate. Why have I failed so miserably? My words on paper spark, don't you think? You thought writing might be good for me. These runes are really yours too. I would have seen you twist the string of pearls around your neck until it burst open, pearls cascading. One by one, I would have picked them up to place them in your cupped hands, all that milky light, and say, your poems are your pearls, yours alone.
This poem is about the young daughter of Assia Wevel, whom Ted Hughes left Sylvia Plath for initially. Her name was Shura, and that's the title of the poem. Quote, Assia felt she must, in her own words, die soon, but execute yourself and your little self efficiently. Words written by Assia Wevel, quoted in Red Comet, The Short and Blazing Life of Sylvia Plath. The girl is just 4, held by her mother, perhaps shy, looking away. The mother will come to call her little self, determined. The girl is just 4. The mother is not rootless anymore. She has a daughter, shy, looking away. To rid herself of barrenness, the mother coaxes her child, determined. The girl is just 4. It is either or, a harrowing beneath the lovely face, shy, looking away. The child who needs her mother, who cannot live without a man, impossible, determined. The girl is just 4. She is not herself to her mother, barely noted, shy, looking away. In memory of the child and the mother. I'll begin this next pairing with a poem in response to the overturning of Roe v. Wade and gun violence. A brutal theory of the fetal heartbeat. After the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court justices, June 24th, 2022, following the expansion of the Second Amendment by the Supreme Court justices, June 23, 2022. What is life inside the girl or the woman alive in her body? Her depths, these laws presume, newly revived. The scrutiny of judges, remote in their black robes, the majority, including one woman, making history in backwardness. Their obsession about who rules the uterus, the blood cycle of women and girls, the sanctity of life. The blood of abortion sickening them so much more than death by the violence they have just facilitated the day before, mulling over language to expand the right to bear arms of all kinds, the Second Amendment having been treated like a person as if it were a second-class right offense needing correction, no matter mass murder after mass murder, no matter Uvalde, the lives of children, not the point. As is the case today, efficiently clearing the way for prosecutors to track the records of women and girls, to track each and every abortion against the encoded baby of the law of unreason, the baby and mother both reduced to detection of a heartbeat, bodies owned by the law, historic, written out against the girl or woman alive inside her body, the trees full, vital, in and of themselves, her own. These judges' argument against her, their dismissal, it is none of her business to decide, to conceive or not, and how they rope these laws around her life, a life they cannot imagine. Yet they proceed, they in fact would, they in fact do, let her burn, stacking the laws like wood around her feet, tying her hands, ready to let the fire catch.
This next poem is relating to the same theme about being able to make the decisions about our own bodies. And this one is entitled to the body that we're meant to wear, but it's entitled To Inhabit the Body. You tell me that as soon as those protrusions sprouted, you knew they didn't belong. They felt alien, you say, as the frilly pastel undies your mother made you wear. Grown, your body becomes your canvas. You are sleeved up with blue snakes coiling your arms, their tongues darting out underneath your chin. You understand it is different for me, and that I don't want a permanent testament to anyone inked in my skin, and that when my chest was renamed breasts, I would say, I have some poems that are found poems, and I will read one of those, but this is imagined, but it's taken from research that I have done that it's basically, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's the most amazing book. It's called The Face of Madness, and it's the origin of psychiatric photography. And basically what it was pictures of cases of people who were institutionalized, and then there were the case studies in relationship to them. And John Connolly, 1794 to 1866, was a leading psychiatrist of the period, and this is imagining his lecture. Exposure, 1856. 1. Gentlemen, although photography is still in its infancy, we now have a superb tool to capture the characteristics of mental aberration objectively, truthfully, without the artist's subjective rendering, so evident in the paintings of poor unfortunates. Please draw your attention to the engraving in Plate 1 of an inmate afflicted with religious melancholia. The excellent product is one of Dr. U. Diamond's photograph. The patient's delusion is that the great Creator has forsaken her, and that no piety or self-abnegation will provide redemption. Please look closely. See how the camera captures what words can only approximate the face of despair. The agonized one knows green pastures will not be her final resting place. Notice the wide forehead indicative of intelligence and imagination, the deep orbed eyes, the head tilted to the side, unable to right itself, held up by the palm. Before the malady made the subject ashamed of her womanly body, gaiety was evident in the sunken cheeks. The Calliotype truly reveals the shuddering soul. When the subject spoke, if she does it all, she looked down, lips barely moving, as she verbalized the wish to mortify her flesh or be impaled. Dear colleagues, as you all know, we are not always successful curing soul sickness. Psychiatry is a new science. But to our surprise and delight, needlepoint stitching and industry in our modern laundry improved her condition and hastened her discharge. And this is the second, that was part one, this is part two. And now this is in the voice of the inmate. Very different experience of her photography session. Let in. I was instructed to sit across from a wooden box with a brass tube and told that my picture would be taken. When I protested I didn't have proper clothing or a bonnet, the superintendent assured me I was helping science and that a second photograph would be taken before I leave, revealing my restored state. I sat in a hard back chair, my elbow on a small side table, rested my head on my hand, my eyes focusing on happier days. I was told not to move. He would have preferred if I was a cadaver. For 20 seconds, which he called the exposure, I was not to smile. Did he intuit that all I wanted was the grave? When abandoning me there, my father clapped a heavy cross around my neck. I had feared the flickering candle before he came into my bed at night, while my mother, sisters, and brothers were asleep in their small deaths. I had brought my Bible with a cracked spine, kneeled until exhausted, stretched my arms out as far as they could reach. No angel caressed my cheek. Only in the laundry room, in the company of other discarded women, did I feel my elbows and knees and see my body decomposing, and not see my body decomposing in a fiery sulfur pit. The washing tub, the scrub brush, and the mangle were my pride. When I turned the handle, wet sheets squeezed through, pressed and dried, smelling of mercy. Finally redeemed, I buried that cross, my choker, deep inside a basket of soiled garments and walked out wearing the bonnet with purple florets I embroidered myself.
Blessings on that voice. The second part of the poem. I chose this poem, and Willa agreed with me on this poem as a pairing for what Willa just read. It's a resistance to objectification and the harms of objectification, and an assertion of the body and the self, and the possibility of healing. Tether. Your body lives with memory, ghosts or omens, the random cuts to the heart. What you learned to believe. This was all a trick and you were not enough. A kind of terror to feel nothing to stand on in truth, scalding messages you did your best to ignore or transform, taking yourself away from yourself, a kind of high art. A misunderstanding to make the world beautiful, clouding your vision, a deliberate tactic you learned early. The hoots and hollers after you, unreal, catalyzed by the familiar sting. The world not easy. It's over, a blue haunt, somewhere in the back of your head to make the world end just like that. And the old betrayals. A finger drawn in charcoal on the back of your powder blue pajama shirt when you were a child. What you had thought had been a flower drawn on your back. This is how you really felt about such affection. This is what you really think, scrubbing away the image in the bathroom sink. You are, after all, a register of heart and lungs. Your arms and shoulders warm or cold, steady or shaking, real enough. The pulse of wrist, of neck, the undercurrents, invisible tides, your bloodstream, sea of memory, dream of blue maps, salt and light and thirst, all that is moon and gravity, all that is human, and you can't know everything. The tether being, your mind, no longer severed, but akin to that salt, akin to that sting, but not dying from it. In your body, the salt tides, the grief currents, you are the signals of that sea, your own way true enough, released.
We are aware that these poems can be pretty dark, and so we really respect you being here with us and knowing that we feel like this is part of being poets of witness, is to be able to respond to this. And of course, we're also trying to say that part of resistance is fighting these things. And as we know, many of these things have changed and are in the process of changing. Peas and Pie, I started with this is because this one is a particularly dark one, and it's one of my found poems, and it's called Black Box, and it's taken from Abu Zabadiah's testimony to the International Committee of the Red Cross. He was the first person subjected to the CIA's torture program, designed and implemented by psychologists James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen. So I take that as, you know, any of you that is part of a association, this is one of the sorrows I feel being part of the helping field, to know that psychologists in this case have used their knowledge of human behavior to what I consider to go beyond exploitation. It'd be similar to lobotomy. As you know, the lobotomy, we're not reading that poem, but the person who actually gave the lobotomy received a Nobel Prize in 1949. So that is what we know about how mental health treatment has changed over time, and we're products of the time in which we live. We were just talking about this today, that what we think is so totally not okay, 20, 30 years from now, people will think, what were they thinking, right? So, and I believe, when I look last, that he's still at Guantanamo. They're always talking about closing it, but it's not closed yet. Yeah, he's still there. Okay. Black box. 2 black boxes were brought into the room outside my cell. One was tall, slightly higher than me and narrow. The other was shorter. I was taken out of my cell. The interrogators wrapped a towel around my neck and used it to swing me around and smash me against the hard walls of the room. I was repeatedly slapped in the face, shackled. The pushing and pulling pulled painfully on my ankles. After the beating, I was placed in the small box. They put a cover to cut out all light and restricted my air supply. It was not high enough for me to sit up. I had to crouch down, which was extremely difficult because of my wounds. The wounds in my legs started to open and bleed. I don't know how long I remained in the small box. I think I slept or fainted. I was then dragged, unable to walk properly, and put on a hospital bed and strapped down very tightly with belts. A black cloth was placed over my face. The interrogators poured mineral water on the cloth so I could not breathe. After a few minutes, the cloth was removed and the bed was rotated to an upright position. The pressure of the straps on my wounds was very painful. I vomited. I struggled against the straps, trying to breathe, but it was hopeless. I thought I was going to die. I lost control of my urine. I still lose control of my urine when I'm under stress.
Thank you. We need to remember history, don't we? And we need to know who's been left out deliberately in order to interrupt perpetuation of harm. And I feel that that's the power of art, is the power of naming and remembering, bringing back. One project I've been paying attention to is the interactive witchcraft map associated with the survey of Scottish witchcraft, which is a map that shows all the documented residences of the places where the accused lived throughout Scotland. So I've been going region to region to region to read the documents. There's so many times not enough information, but there are details that do come forth. And I'm writing poems from those details because I want to imagine those women. I want to remember them. This poem is dedicated to the memory of Janet Dinnis of a place called Fettler in the Shetland Islands. The investigation date of her being accused of witchcraft was October 12, 1616. The characterization was maleficium, or meeting with witches, neighborhood dispute. She was known to quarrel, she was known to swear. She was a widow. The footnotes are as follows. She was seen in a trance, repeating words when her husband was at sea and in trouble. This was held against her, too. Her execution method was strangle and burn. This poem is for her. The danger of incantation. If I were rocking back and forth, repeating myself, don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die. If I were an old woman living alone in the midst of the storm that shrieks for my beloved, the sea moaning, swallowing the night whole, why am I being punished?
We're coming down the home stretch, just a few more.
Thank you for being here today and listening.
The next couplets are relating to the Holocaust. And some of you may not know that Hitler was a vegetarian. Tasters. And this you'll see is a juxtaposition between Hitler's tasters and those who were in concentration camps. Okay. Tasters. Hitler is a vegetarian. You hold a crust in your cheek. Daughters of the Deutschland taste his food on bone china. Do you gnaw on a potato peel? A rose petal is a swastika in the center of each plate. You suck on a fingernail of schmaltz. So those of you who are Jewish might know what schmaltz is. It's chicken fat that when I was a kid used to put it on bread. Not what you can imagine, right? So you suck on a fingernail of schmaltz. The girls with braids pulled tight against their skull puts the tip of an asparagus spear in her mouth. The water called soup won't stay down. The one with skyless blue eyes swallows creamy white cauliflower florets. Will she keel over? You palm a bit of turnip. The Führer doesn't butcher animals. Another Fräulein licks a perfect red pepper. There is room to lie down on your side. Your head won't lift up. Your mouth is a pit.
This poem is called Brunhilde. When she was in her 20s, Brunhilde Pomsel worked as secretary to the Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. She always described herself, quote, as just being a sideline figure and not interested at all in politics. Her story is featured in A German Life, in which she is interviewed at the age of 103. The poem's lines are based on statements she makes during the film. And I used the pantoum form because I thought the repetition reflected her own contradictions and denials. I was always duty conscious. I'm one of the cowards. There was no real difference. What did it matter? I'm one of the cowards. So that was my fate. What did it matter? We waved to our beloved Führer. So that was my fate. We ourselves were all inside a huge concentration camp. We waved to our beloved Führer. Why not? That was a new man. Ourselves inside a huge concentration camp. In the meantime, Eva no longer lived near us. Why not? He was our new man, because I didn't do anything but type. In the meantime, Eva no longer lived near us. It was just the impression of the raging crowd, because I didn't do anything but type. Eva had wonderful eyes. It was just the impression of the raging crowd. And Eula Jenisch, was such a nice, friendly man. Eva had wonderful eyes. There was no way of excluding yourself. And Eula Jenisch was such a nice, friendly man. Yes, they are friendly, but gay. There was no way of excluding yourself. It was a natural phenomenon. Yes, they are friendly, but gay. Second pages are coming. We knew nothing. A natural phenomenon. I didn't work with him, but for him. We knew nothing. I enjoyed being able to buy a cute dress. I didn't work with him, but for him. There is always a bit of gray in everything. I enjoyed being able to buy a cute dress. I didn't do anything but type. There's always a bit of gray in everything. We multiplied all the terrible crimes. I didn't do anything but type. What did it matter? We multiplied the terrible crimes. I was always duty conscious.
The final poems that I'm going to be reading relate to the last section of the book that's called Termination. And for any of you who are in the field or ever been in therapy, termination, it's a ridiculously terrible word, but it actually means moving towards the end of treatment. I don't know how that got to be the word. And so in this section, it's much larger than that. It's about end of relationships, the ultimate death. It's about endings in all forms. If any of you have ever lived in Portland or been in this part of Portland, there's a bridge called Suicide Bridge. Has anyone ever heard of that? Sadly, yes, you have. And so the actual name is called the Vista Bridge. So it's Southwest Portland, right? And it earned its nickname, sadly, because from 2004 to 2011, 13 people died jumping off. If you've ever been there more recently, it's much harder. sad, that people cannot easily, they have to really, really want to do it. So they've made some impact on making that bridge less accessible to people. It's called Facing Suicide Bridge. It takes 3 seconds to fall 12 stories. My window faces a mountain that looks like a cupcake. I think you know what that mountain is. A pink building with a flattened face and the bridge of despair. I should move. I feel her out there standing on one of its cement benches ready to dive. Their pain is a crevasse so vast, no one can peel them out. They have become beings beyond caring about the anguish their broken bodies will bring. Her hoodie billows out as she drops. She crashes on the tracks, her head tucked in her arm. Blood seeps from her nostrils. I want the bodies to stop falling. I call 911. Always too late. Everyone dies. At least these bridge walkers have chosen when and where. The sound of a person hitting the ground from a great height is hard to describe. It is sort of like slamming your hand down with full force on a table. It will hurt for days.
Thank you. I dedicate this poem to my brother, whom I miss. He was a beautiful person. Fear of evil. Little brother, you worked hard to be so good, close to God, following the rules, the narrow way, avoiding the wrong places, the wrong prayers, the clarity of that direction threatening to break every time you were ready to break. That God could not hold you. And I will share this poem too now, which I was thinking how it's important for me to say those whom we've lost because of suicide are and were much more than just that act. And their lives were vital and irreplaceable. And I wrote this poem as a way of honoring life in the human and more than human, and the way of being able to breathe and observe and connect. And I was very inspired by Denise Levertoff's work in her book, Sands of the Well. I want to live. Everything is threatened, but meanwhile, everything presents itself. Denise Levertoff from her poem, In the Woods. I want to live, says the trace of light, gleaming on the branch, blossoming with white flowers of wild pears. I want to live, says the trace of rain on the stones before disappearing into the air. And I want to live, say the stones again, in the midst of water, of creeks, the talking mountains, the clamor of stones, dividing the waters of the earth. I want to live, say the singing tree frogs, in certain seasons of rain, before those seasons fade away. Following winter after winter, I want to live, says the sheen of buttercups, thick on the curve of the unspectacular hill. The shadows of the lake today rippling dark fir trees, their far delicate green tipped against wide spaces, sky inhabited by the departing instincts of flight, the many unseen and subtle adjustments of feathers. I want to live, says the little fishing boat drifting by, caught by accident in this frame. I want to live, says the thread of attention, the depths of the turning and turning, the still alive journeying fish.
And this is my second to last poem. This is called Italian Plums. And many of you may have known, or some of you may have known, Sarah Lance. She was a wonderful poet who published through Calyx, the journal, as well as when they were still publishing books. And I had a similar pleasure. And if some of you may have known Margarita Donnelly, she was the editor of Calyx for a million years until she also died. And so she and I actually read from Sarah's posthumous collection that came out very soon after she died. So this is a homage to Sarah Lance, called Italian Plums. We climb up lichen encrusted limbs to pluck purple, black fruit, protected with white powder that hides their sheen. We are inundated with plums, burdened by bounty. Why do we merit this small happiness, plums boiling down in the big stainless steel pot? Mason jars brimming with jam, brown paper bags bulging with enough for everyone. If only this plethora of plums could bring you back. But their days are even shorter than yours. They have burst their skins on a staining pavement. You are alive, but are no longer, and will not savor the juice of even one small plum.
In January, I focused on writing a poem a day just to see if I could maintain that. Not to finish the poems necessarily, but to just generate new work, however long or however short. And this poem came, and I wanted to share it because it's about perspective, I think. The way fracturing can in fact be a sign of blossoms, potentially. New Year stirrings. This morning near the garden, shrieks of towhees from beneath the dark green shelter of juniper. Further off, the gray-green tangle of woods and bramble, shaggy branches of old man's beard, ravens crackle back and forth, a screen of bare branches fracturing the sky, a tracery of buds, waiting for their time, not ready yet at closer look.
This will be our last poem this afternoon, and we really do hope that you'll, after the open mic, you'll have some questions for us. Shelley's Heart, and I think you'll know who this Shelley is, and also his wife who wrote Frankenstein. Shelley's Heart, we talk how easy it is to jump holding hands, to die at the same moment, sprint over the half window of our high-rise downtown, crumple on the ground, our eyes open. Percy Shelley's fragile craft capsized near Livorno. His heart in a furnace of iron refused to burn. Mary wrapped her husband's broken pump in a page of his elegy to Keats. They were together for 10 years. We have more than doubled that. If you are taken from me, I won't hold your heart in my cupped hands, swaddled in your words. Go deeper. Equanimity is not the goal. I caress your Buddha earlobes, pinch your ass shapeless inside your torn jeans. Hear your voice resonant and sure as a singing bell. And in bed, you on your back, my side, body, and neck nest into you, as if we would always fit that way. Thank you.
I just want to take a very long, deep breath. That was beautiful.
That feeling that you first have to even have a mindset that there's an inner life, that there's an unconscious, that our dreams mean something, they're not just detritus, that you really have to, I think that to even see that our inner lives cause us more suffering than anything else. And I know from when I worked in Cambodia in the 90s, I mean, obviously people survived the killing fields, and there was still not a sense that there's anything like post-traumatic stress disorder, that maybe your life might be affected by your family members, dying at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. So I think if you can't even have that mindset about that our inner lives dramatically affect how we function in the world, how can you even begin to help a person feel better? Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here.